Hey everyone, welcome back to Thought Crime and Keto and Crime. Today, I bet you're wondering, why is Tracy dressed like a middle school principal? Well, I just decided I would dress up for this occasion just because if something happens to me and I want to look better than how I normally look, so that's why. What am I talking about? Well, today we're going to delve into Satanism. So if a lightning bolt comes from somewhere and incinerates me, at least I looked my best before it happened. And so we're going to get into the history of Satan himself. We're going to get into what is Satanism. Then we're going to get into two of the major satanic organizations that are still alive and well here in the United States. They're both atheistic. So we're going to talk about that. We're just going to have some fun. It's going to be a little creepy, yes, but I think we're going to enjoy it. We're also going to delve into the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s, and in some cases, still today, but for that we'll be going back in time to a segment from a previous video I did, but I will let you know when that happens. And overall, and I don't know why I'm doing this pin at you, but overall we're just going to have a good time. I want to say this up front. I do not believe in Satan. I do not believe in the occult. I believe in what we can see, hear, and prove. Talking about this does not advocate any belief in Satanism, witchcraft, the occult, Frankenstein, Dracula, Freddy Krueger, or Jason Voorhees. Michael Myers is still up for review, but it constitutes none of that. So we're just going to have some fun studying a very unusual subject. And with that, let's get started. So, what is Satan? Or what is Satanism? Satanism is very briefly the belief in the existence and ideologies of the character known as Satan. Satanism has taken many, many forms in the world, going all the way back to, I'm sure, the prehistoric times when anything was counter to the accepted religious beliefs of whomever. That could literally be considered the antithesis of the God. So you have Satan loosely being the antithesis of the accepted God. And if you look at other religions, like ancient religions, they all had their evil antithesis gods. So they were, in fact, their form of Satan. Even with the Greeks, you had the Olympian gods. Well, you had Hades, who was lord of the underworld and wasn't so much revered by people or the other gods. He would be their form of Satan. He was the people that tended to the underworld, to the dead, kind of represented death and all bad things. So you can see in all religions there is that particular character. In the Egyptian religions, you had the moon or night, or even death itself, kind of taking on that personification. And the whole idea of Satan, that is the fallen angel that we know Satan to be, comes in with Judeo-based Christianity. And Satan didn't really take his form until the Middle Ages. But we're going to get into this. So let's get into the history of what we know today as the modern interpretation of Satan or the devil. All right, let's take a look at who Satan is. We all know that he's supposedly the fallen angel Lucifer, but that was not his original beginnings. He kind of morphed into that when we get to the Middle Ages, and we'll go over that. But the first appearance of Satan as we know him was in the full version of the ancient Hebrew Bible known as the Tanakh, which is what the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, make up. You've heard of the Torah. This is the expanded version of the Torah. The Torah is a part of it. And you first hear rumblings of this creature or this personification known as Satan, though the actual pronunciation would be Satan, more appropriately in the ancient Hebrew, the Satan. So, the Satan was simply known as a tormentor of ancient Judah and the nation of Israel. He was a member of the sons of God, which is what the Tanakh refers to as kind of a court of God. So the Satan was a member of God's high court, and he was responsible for tormenting the people below. He was served in the court of Yahweh just like any other courtesan. Think of him as kind of an evil jester, I guess. People believe the ancient Hebrews based this off of the Angra Mainyu of the Zoroastrian religion, which was something very similar. But this is the first appearance of that Satan word. And over time, in different scriptures and different versions, you will see this Satan appear. Anytime there's torment and it's attributed to celestial interference in the ancient scriptures, you will see a Satan. It went from one godly courtesan, the Satan, to just Satan anytime there was celestial interference. Now, this could be planned or not planned, but there were many, many Satans. For example, the original Satan, and then you actually get into the Bible that we're all more familiar with, into the book of Job, the tormentor that actually made a bet with God as to how much he could torment his servant Job and get him to turn away from him. And God was like, oh, no, 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 no. That was another Satan if you go back to the original transcripts. Now, as much as we know what are the original transcripts, but the earlier you go back, it's still referred to as a Satan, not Satan. Modern translations have understood have translated that to be Satan that we know from the Middle Ages. The character we know is Satan. But in the original works, it was known, or the earliest works that we have, we really don't know the original works of any of these holy scriptures. It was simply a Satan, so it may not have been what we actually refer to as Satan, the devil, Lucifer, the fallen angel. So all throughout ancient religion, there was also always this idea of a celestial tormentor, and it was referred to by the Hebrews as a Satan. And then when Christianity spun off of Judaism, and what we know as the, common error, it actually, you saw this character, for lack of a better term, take on a more distinct identity. Instead of just any tormentor, any celestial obstacle, any obstacle of all that would be referred to as a Satan, you had this character taking on more of a one-on-one supervillain type of personification. And you find this written very distinctly, especially in the New Testament. It was in the New Testament that you first hear references to Satan, pronounced Satan now, and that his connection to the fallen angel Lucifer. Say, Tracy, it's not the New Testament that makes all these claims. Some of them is in the Old Testament. I'm going to explain that. It was Christianity, particularly in the Middle Ages, when the Bible was retranslated or started to put into some sort of canonical use, that the Old Testament mention in Genesis of a serpent. Remember the serpent that had Adam and Eve eat the fruit off the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? It was in the Middle Ages that you first have the connection between that serpent, which in the Old Testament was just called, the Christian Old Testament was just called a serpent. It was later on in the Middle Ages, it was tied to being Satan himself. Think about that. Once that connection was made, we start to quickly ascend Satan into some sort of supervillain. Now, the New Testament canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, do talk about Satan, the actual, character that we all know and love. He tempted Jesus in the desert. He appeared as a red dragon in the book of Revelation. And it was during this point, authors of these canonical Gospels, as well as other Gospels within the New Testament, and even some of the Old Testament books that dealt with the prophets, started to slowly link the personification of Satan to the earlier forms, such as the serpent in the book of Genesis. It was during the later writings that the serpent was actually identified as Satan, whereas in the original, in the oldest versions of the Old Testament that we have, the book of Genesis, it just refers to this creature as a serpent, not Satan himself. It was tied to that later on, I guess, to kind of make the story work a little bit. But so you have the New Testament and later Old Testament works now tying a one and only Satan, not just any purveyor, not just any obstacle that could behest God's people, the Satan. Now you actually have him called Satan. And he is now tied to the serpent. And then you have the stories of Lucifer, which was mentioned in the New Testament, whereas Jesus said, I was there when Lucifer fell from grace. It was later on in the New Testament, and more importantly in the Middle Ages, where you had Satan tied to the fallen archangel Lucifer. And most of the stories we have about these two distinct characters come from non-religious works. They come from they're not necessarily part of the Bible. They come from other religious works. I think the most popular personification we have of these stories is Milton, Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained. This is literally the story of Satan, and he literally is the one that puts the final touches on tying Lucifer, the archangel that was spoken of briefly, with, in the scripture, with Satan himself. And he literally tells the story based on a couple of passages where Jesus said he was there when Satan fell from glory. And this is where we get the story of the rebellion against God in heaven. Lucifer believed he was more powerful than God. He didn't like everything that God said, so he was going to basically rebel against God and start his own thing. And he got into a celestial war with God, and he and all of his angels that fought that war against God and lost were cast out. And so you had Lucifer, beautiful Lucifer, falling to the earth along with all his fallen angels to be basically banished to hell, what we know as hell, a place of torment, fire, brimstone, gnashing of teeth, wailing and gnashing of teeth. And all of those fallen angels became demons that were destined to torment God's people. And then that's where you have Jesus coming to earth to, die for everyone's sins, to fight and cast out these demons, to face down Satan in the desert, being tempted. And then all those stories were kind of tied together with Satan being the original serpent. And he was able to transform himself into a serpent, tempt Eve, cause the fall, and thus we have Judaism and Christianity. And it's supervillain Satan. So you have Judaism, the Satan, which could be any tormentor of man. Then you had the New Testament bringing in the idea of one tormentor, changing that to Satan, and then later scripture tying that to a fallen angel, Lucifer, and then even tying it further back to the serpent in the garden. And then you had Middle Ages coming along and men writing religious texts like Milton's Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, where he tells the story of Satan in mythical way. And so that's how we've kind of personified. And then in the other Abrahamic religion, Islam, there is a mention in the Quran of the Shaitan, which is also a demon or a group of demons that is a tormentor. We believe that is linked to either Satan himself or his demons. But in all the Abrahamic religion, you have this idea of a adversary for God, a fallen angel that rebelled. Rebellion was put down. He became evil. He inhabits the underworld. All of this taking bits and pieces from Roman mythology, Greek mythology, Zoroastrianism, and all being tied together into a great celestial war in the Middle Ages by religious works by human authors and poets. And you have what we know today as the God universe, much like, to me, the Marvel universe or the DC universe. You have characters, you have wars, you have whatever. And other religions have built upon this too. Look at LDS, Mormonism. They take that story of Lucifer and Jesus and God, Yahweh, and turn that into even more of an epic battle. Now you have Lucifer actually being the older brother of Jesus, who was jealous of his younger brother, and they fought a war over earth, and he was cast out. And instead of him falling down and becoming demons, they take it another fourth. He became Satan. His angels that fought on his side became demons. But they took it one step further, and any angel or celestial being that's kind of sat on the fence and didn't participate got cast down and became dark-skinned people, which we've got into a whole, I'll link my thing on LDS right up here, their whole history with racism and stuff like that, which they don't do that anymore. Going to put that out there. And then you had other kinds of stories kind of building on top of this. If you look at the different types of Christianity, you see these stories told in very different forms between Roman Catholicism, Orthodox Catholicism, both Russian and Greek. And then when you get into Protestantism, almost totally different. And then you get into all the shoot-offs within Protestantism. And then you get into cults like Scientology. They all have some tie into that. Though Scientology is a whole different video game level of weird, which we will get into, I promise you. But it's based off the story. Even though the stories aren't there, it's there just under different character names. So that, in a nutshell, in a very brief nutshell, is the story of the character we know as Satan. Now let's get into the history of Satanism, shall we? Satanism, the study or the worship of either the attributes of Satan or Satan himself as a theistic god. Who would want to do this, is probably what you're saying. Well, lots of people, starting from the Middle Ages, with the works of John Milton, which kind of made Lucifer into almost a, anti-hero. Not really even a villain, just an anti-hero. Just somebody that was misunderstood and was a rebel and became this epic creature that was destined for destruction. To Dante's Inferno, which kind of showed all the images that we recognize as hell, having several layers, a place of torment, and then there's people, the top layer is not so bad. You have people that lived before Christianity, such as Aristotle and Socrates and people like that are encased in the first layer of hell, where there's absolutely no torment. It's just a place. They don't know what's around them. And then you get further into the levels of hell, and the torment gets worse until you get to where you actually see Satan himself, who's portrayed as this huge fiery demon dragon kind of creature. So, and then you also have things like Dr. Faust legend, all of that kind of perpetrating through the Middle Ages and so on. So there was always a fear of evil and people actually tapping into that evil for power to use against humanity and God and all that. So that's where in the Middle Ages, the fear of anything outside the Christian religion began to take hold. And you had people that practiced ancient pagan religions, or even people that studied what they called the forbidden arts, like, witchcraft, alchemy, all these people being associated with Satan because those things were not mainstream. And I think that's a tendency for humans even today, to anything that's different or outside the norm, it gets demonized. So kind of the same thing here. And then that carried on through the Middle Ages into the Age of Enlightenment, where you had after the Martin Luther and the Great Reformation, and you had the Protestant religion starting to take hold. This intensified because now you had two enemies. As a Protestant, you had Satan and the Catholic Church as an enemy, and anything that was outside the norm was definitely demonized. And you had, like Calvinism starting to take hold. You had fire and brimstone servants, sinners in the hands of an angry God starting to form. And anything that wasn't God was of Satan, and it was evil. And we are way past the time in history where people actually practice openly witchcraft, Wiccan as an actual religion. That does take place today. There are Wiccans and there are people that practice what they call white witchcraft. That's a totally different story. We'll get to that. But in the Middle Ages, you had people actually trying to turn, lead into gold or other things into gold, really dabbling in stuff that would be considered magic. And then you get into the Age of Enlightenment, and then into just after the Reformation, and you get in almost to the founding of America, and then you get into more of a fear of that rather than that actually happening. And this is where you get things like the Salem witch trials, which, if you want to hear about that, I have a video. I'll link it just above. All coming from fear of this thing known as Satan and people that have tapped in to his power for their own gain. That's essentially what it boils around. So in Europe, you had all kinds of religious persecution leading into the 15 and 1600s. You had the Spanish Inquisition. You had the switch from England switched from Catholicism to Protestantism, and then the reign of Bloody Mary Tudor, who killed all the Protestants to bring back in the Catholics. So you had a lot of bloodletting and just all kinds of evil stuff, kind of coupled with still this fear of witchcraft. Well, a lot of people fled that and came to the New World and built what we know as the first colonies, but they brought their superstitions with them. And this was absolutely built upon when they got to the New World and discovered the indigenous people who did not worship their God. They had what could only be described as a pagan type religion, at least to them. Pagan meaning, they worshipped nature, they worshipped idols, they worshipped other things. So they're seeing this stuff. And that new fear of Satanism and witchcraft being tied to Satanism started to fester. And then you had the development of Mr. Cotton Mather, who was instrumental in starting the Salem witch trials. Mather was born in the New Colonies in the 1600s, son of Increase Mather, who was also a well-known minister, founded the New World known as Harvard. He was a learned man. He first promoted the use of inoculation against disease in the New World, but he also promoted the idea that Satan ruled the New World, not only because of the pagan religions that people observed when they first came here, but just because it was a very hand-to-mouth kind of existence, and there was lots of scary things around them, so they wanted to basically control anything that they could, and eventually it was just a scary time, and people personify things when things are scary. We can look around our own modern world, things that we're scared of. But in 1689, Cotton Mather would produce or pen the book known as Memorable Providences, which kind of chronicled strange afflictions affecting the Goodwin family of Boston. He helped bring a suit against a Catholic washerwoman that worked for the family named Goody Glover. And ultimately, she was tried and convicted as a witch. But he began to notice the children's rare ailments and their fits of rage, and he would fast and pray over the children, write down everything that they did. And so he became the affinity on people possessed by witchcraft. And it was his writings and his input that helped spearhead the Salem witch trials. Again, I will put that link right up there. So from Mather and the time of the Salem witch trials, we can go through history and see how the fear of witchcraft, the fear of Satanism, because all of this is, again, tied to Satan because of passages in the Bible, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, la, la, la. All of this kind of evolves over the years. And then let's get into modern times. Let's get into the 1960s, where you see Satanism take on a whole new way. 1960s, the baby boomers. They were coming into young adulthood. They were protesting against a society they felt was no longer working. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? And they were protesting things such as the Vietnam War, all that good stuff. Think peace and love. Well, all of that had kind of an underlying meaning. Within these trends toward protest and a more simple life, returning to, living off the land, there was a revival in interest in the occult, namely Wiccan, which is essentially one, kind of a nature worship type of religion. If you're Wiccan, don't come at me, not trying to cram your religion into a nutshell, just trying to say that there was a new revived interest in the Wiccan religion in the 1960s. And this led to further study of other types of occult, such as magic. And you had the revival of the writings of Aleister Crowley, who was an early 20th century occultist from England who literally believed in magic. Even though he did not believe in a deity, he believed in magic and man's ability to bring forth magic, good or evil. And so you had a renew in the readings of this man, and this kind of brought forth a whole new interest in witchcraft, Satanism, occult, what have you. And then you have the birth of cult leaders such as Charles Manson and the whole, God is dead type of movement. And you can see how Satanism really started to take hold as a movement, rather. And it's here that I need to end part 1 of this. But when I come back next time on part 2, we will delve into the birth of one of the most well-known Satanist organizations, the Church of Satan, and its founder, Anton LaVey, as well as starting to branch off into what is known as theistic Satanism and atheist Satanism. And we will then come forward into the modern century, leading into the third part of this, which will be a conversation with former American atheist president David Silverman, who is a personal hero of mine and was very gracious to come on and have a conversation with me about how the modern edifications of Satanism, which are atheistic, totally atheistic, they're just there as a middle finger to the religious right, have what part they play in the atheist movement. So I'll be back next time with the rise of modern Satanism. And until then, Keto Comic.